Good afternoon, and welcome to the EMA's 25th Anniversary Knowledge Series. And as part of this series, we've been having a number of webinars sharing information on the role and responsibilities of the EMA. Our last webinar focused on the EMA's permit monitoring process. So today, we'll be taking a deeper look into the revised water pollution rules. These rules were in effect for a number of years, and then it was revised and re-implemented in 2019. So we look forward to bringing you that information today. Today's session will also be recorded, and it will be placed on the EMA's YouTube channel, which can be easily accessed via our website at ema.co.tt. In addition to our Zoom participants, we are also streaming live on Facebook, so welcome to our Facebook viewers as well. And just to give you an idea of the format of today's webinar, we will begin with the presentation, and this will be followed by a question and answer segment. During the Q&A segment, we ask that you utilize the chat box option only for typing in your questions. We will not be utilizing verbal questions. So in light of that, we ask that you refrain from using the raised hand icon. But if there's something that interests you or you're excited about, feel free to use the clapping hand or the thumbs up icon. Nearing the end of the Q&A, we'll be also launching a poll, and that is a very short questionnaire to gather your feedback on the effectiveness of today's webinar, and we encourage everyone to participate in the poll. It's just about 4 questions. It will be up for about 2 to 3 minutes, and I will provide a prompt. On our Facebook Live platform, we encourage our viewers to post their questions in the comments section, and we may respond to them directly there, or some of them will be sent to the EMA's presenters so that they can respond to them during the Q&A segment. So at this point, I will introduce our presenters this afternoon, both of whom are from the EMA's water unit. Our first presenter will be Ms. Lorraine Maharaj. She is an Environmental Program Officer 2 attached to the water unit. She has been with the EMA for over 12 years, and Lorraine has a background in aquatic ecology and fisheries management. And she also has experience in developing identification keys and methods of using freshwater fauna as indicators of water quality. Our second presenter will be Mr. Vivian Joseph, also an Environmental Program Officer 2, attached to the water unit. And Vivian has also been with the EMA for quite some time, over 13 years. He has a background in environmental management with sociology, and he also has additional training in water and wastewater services and management. So we have a very experienced team coming to us this evening to share information on the EMA's revised water pollution rules. So without further delay, I will hand you over to Lorraine to begin today's presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nadia, for that very warm welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to present today on the water pollution rules of 2019. So for today's presentation, I'll give a brief overview of the Environmental Management Act and its subsidiary legislation. I'll talk for a short bit about the water pollution rules of 2001 and the reason why these rules were revised. I'll give an overview of the water pollution rules of 2019. Then I will hand you over to my colleague, Mr. Vivian Joseph, who will describe the water pollution permitting process, the revised fee structure, and the next steps. Okay, so the Environmental Management Authority was established under the Environmental Management Act, Chapter 3505. This act outlines the roles and responsibilities of the EMA and authorizes the organization to develop legislation for pollution management. There are Since 2001, there have been a number of pieces of subsidiary legislation promulgated by the EMA, some of which are designed to protect biodiversity. So, for example, you have the environmentally sensitive species rules and the environmentally sensitive areas rules. You also have a number of pieces of legislation designed to control the entry of pollutants or how much pollutants enter into the different environmental media of Trinidad and Tobago. So, for example, you have the noise pollution control rules, the air pollution rules, and of course, today, the topic today, the water pollution rules. So, the water pollution rules were first developed in 2001, and the EMA began implementing them in 2007. The goal of these rules is to reduce, prevent, and control the amount of water pollutants entering into the aquatic environment of Trinidad and Tobago. These rules, however, were revised in 2019. The main reason being that the fee structure associated with the rules were challenged legally. The argument being that the fee structure was not in line with the polluter pays principle. This principle states that the amount that a polluter should pay should be proportional to how much pollution is discharged into the environment. The fee structure that was associated with the WPR, or Water Pollution Rules of 2001, was a fixed rate. So that means that regardless of how much you polluted, everybody paid the same fee. These fees were therefore challenged in the court. The case made its way to the Privy Council, who ruled against the EMA. Apart from revising the fee structure, the rules were revised to incorporate lessons learned from the 12 years of implementation of the 2001 rules and to provide an integrated approach to watershed management, which aligns with national policies and international convention obligations. So, for example, we have some national policies such as the National Environmental Policy, the Draft Integrated Water Resources Management Plan, and of course the Vision 2030 Plan. We also have obligations to meet under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and it's hoped that these revised rules will not only be more aligned with these obligations, but enable us to meet some of the requirements under these conventions. So aside from those revisions, the rules also include ambient water quality standards and require the implementation or development of watershed improvement plans. This represents a more integrated and holistic approach to pollution management in Trinidad and Tobago, in that the previous rules focus mostly on control of point sources of pollution. And by that I mean pollution that could be traced back to discrete entry point or a pipe. Right, so these rules now incorporate things like non-point sources of pollution, and as I said, ambient water quality standards. So it's a more holistic way of managing water pollution in Trinidad and Tobago. The water pollution rules of 2019 consist of 3 schedules. Each schedule has a list of water pollutants and standards associated with each schedule. There are 2 processes for managing water pollution, and of course, there's a revised fee structure. There are some exemptions to the rules so that not all discharges would be targeted. So, for example, let's say you own a facility and the discharge from the sewage treatment plant, of your sewage discharge, from your facility enters into a WASA-owned and operated sewage treatment plant. That discharge would be exempt under the rules. I should point out that the discharge emanating from the WASA-owned and operated sewage treatment plant is not exempt. Also exempt under rules would be discharges from households, so things like discharges from your bathrooms, from the kitchen sink, unless, of course, you're operating a commercial establishment from your house, for example, a hairdressing salon. Discharges from the normal operations of motor vehicles are also exempt under rules, so things like leaks and so on from normal driving activities. Right, so the first schedule, as I said, is Schedule 1. And this schedule identifies 28 substances or parameters and the concentrations at which these are considered water pollutants in Trinidad and Tobago. So that, except for the exemptions I mentioned earlier, anyone discharging any of these parameters at the identified concentrations is considered a source of water pollution in Trinidad and Tobago. So, for example, this slide gives us just a brief overview of some of the parameters listed in Schedule 1 and the quantity, condition, or concentration at which those parameters are considered to be a water pollutant. So, for example, temperature is considered to be a water pollutant when the temperature of the effluent or wastewater varies a maximum of 3 degrees centigrade from ambient water temperature. pH is considered to be a water pollutant at concentrations less than 6 or greater than 9 pH units. So if, for example, you have a facility that's discharging wastewater into the environment, and you test the pH of that wastewater and you find that it is 4 pH units or 12 pH units, then you're considered to be a source of water pollution. Schedule 2 is what we refer to as end-of-pipe standards, and these are permissible limits established for the 28 substances or parameters identified in Schedule 1. The limits vary according to the receiving environment into which the wastewater is discharged, and there are 4 different receiving environments identified under Schedule 2. The first receiving environment would be inland surface waters, and this would include things like drains, rivers. Then you have the coastal nearshore environment, which would be the marine environment extending up to 3 nautical miles from the high water mark. You have the marine offshore environment, which would be the marine area outwards of the 3 nautical mile mark. And the last receiving environment would be environmentally sensitive areas or groundwater. The second schedule limits are used to identify facilities that need to apply for a water pollution permit. So any facility discharging outside of Schedule 2 for the relevant receiving environment will be notified to apply for a permit. This slide gives you an example of some of the parameters in Schedule 2 and the permissible limits for each of the different receiving environments. So let's say you're discharging heated wastewater into the environment, and let's say you are discharging into inland surface waters, then the temperature should not exceed 35 degrees centigrade. If you're discharging into the coastal nearshore environment, then the temperature of your wastewater should not exceed 40 degrees centigrade. If you're discharging into the marine offshore environment, you should not exceed 45 degrees centigrade. And if you're discharging into an environmentally sensitive area of groundwater, then the temperature should not increase above ambient. So that's what NIAA means, no increase above ambient. The final schedule, Schedule 3, lists ambient water quality standards for Trinidad and Tobago. Standards have been developed for both fresh and marine waters of Trinidad and Tobago. I should point out that ambient standards are developed for specific use of the water body. So if, for example, a water body is being used for recreational purposes, that would be things like swimming and other forms of primary contact, then you would have standards or limits designed to ensure that the water is safe for that use. Okay, so for fresh waters, we have identified 3 uses, or designated uses as they're called. So the first designated use would be protection of aquatic life and aquatic ecosystems. And so we have standards developed to ensure that the biodiversity and ecosystem functions of the fauna and flora in that water body can be protected for that use. We have standards developed for raw water supplies. So these standards would try to protect water abstracted for potable use. And the last one, the third one, would be standards for recreational use to ensure that the water body is safe for human contact. For the marine environment, we have standards developed for 2 designated uses: protection of aquatic life and aquatic ecosystems, and recreational use. These ambient standards are intended to guide the development of watershed improvement plans in Trinidad and Tobago. So what a watershed improvement plan is essentially is that Uh, we are looking to identify all sources and quantify all the levels of the different types of pollutants entering into each watershed of Trinidad and Tobago, and develop methods to mitigate or to prevent their entry so that the water quality is protected and does not degrade beyond the standards for whatever the body is used for. Watershed improvement plans would be the second mechanism that the EMA intends to use to manage water pollution in Trinidad and Tobago. As I said, the first mechanism is the issuance of water pollution permit. So I will now hand over to my colleague, Mr. Vivian Joseph, who will guide us through the water pollution permitting process.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction, Lorraine and Nadia. The goal of the water pollution permit is to reduce the amount of pollutants discharged from any facility and eventually to achieve compliance to Schedule 2 of the water pollution rules. The water pollution permit is facility specific, and each facility with a point source discharge is required to submit an application to the EMA. Upon receipt of the application, the EMA reviews the application and the effluent data. If the data does not exceed Schedules 1 and 2, the facility may be required to implement a watershed improvement plan. If the data exceeds Schedule 1, but does not exceed Schedule 2, the facility may be required to implement a watershed improvement plan. However, if the data exceeds both Schedules 1 and 2, a permit is issued and the facility is required to come into compliance with Schedule 2 within 5 years. Subsequently, the facility may be required to implement a watershed improvement plan. As indicated by my colleague earlier, one of the reasons for the revision of the water pollution rules is to incorporate lessons learned over the past 12 years of implementation. One such lesson is that having a deadline date such as the 45 working days from commencement of the rules for the submission of applications results in an inundation of applications to the EMA. In an effort to manage this process, the EMA has issued notification letters to facilities who were under the permitting regime in the previous legislation in batches. The applications are to be submitted as one hard copy and one soft copy in PDF format. Upon receipt of the application, the EMA has 20 working days to review the application. A technical and an administrative review is conducted. A site visit is scheduled, and an acknowledgement notice is issued where further information may be requested. Upon receipt of all further information, the EMA issues a notice of determination. Within 30 working days of issuance of that determination notice, the EMA develops the permit and issues it to the facility. Subsequent to issuance of the permit, the EMA monitors compliance of the conditions of the permit. Some of the permit features include an effluent monitoring program, which identifies the authorized effluent discharges from the facility, the sample points within each of the effluent discharges, the water pollutants that are to be analyzed, the sampling frequency, which could be continuous, fortnightly, monthly, or quarterly, and the sample type, which could be in situ or a grab. The effluent monitoring report requirements, this presents the format within which the sample results are to be presented to the EMA, submitted to the EMA, sorry. The effluent compliance deadlines, the EMA works intimately with the facility to derive these deadlines. Subsequent to the issuance of the permit, there are documents to be submitted. One such document is the Quality Assurance Project Plan, and this plan identifies the quality assurances and quality control measures that are to be implemented from sample collection, sample analysis, through reporting of the results. Another document to be submitted is the Annual Report of Progress, and this document details all the progress made by the facility under the permit for the previous year. A best management practices plan and a pollution control plan may be required upon request. These plans both detail measures that may be implemented or have been implemented to reduce or mitigate water pollutants entering the effluent stream. Post-compliant monitoring presents a mechanism for continued monitoring of compliance once a facility achieves compliance to second schedule. The fees regulations. Under the previous legislation, there was a fixed application fee. An initial application incurred a cost of $2,500 and a renewal application incurred a cost of $5,000. Under the current legislation, there's a tiered application fee based on discharge volume. Under the previous legislation, there was a fixed annual fee of $10,000 for an initial application and $15,000 for a renewal application. Under this current legislation, the annual fee is calculated based on pollutant load, monitoring and inspection fee, and beneficial use. And the beneficial use is just a mechanism to encourage facilities to reuse wastewater as opposed to discharging directly. The annual fee under this legislation is due upon the EMA receiving 12 months of monitoring data, and the EMA shall notify the facility of the calculated annual fee. The application fees. This table presents the different categories that a facility may fall into based on the effluent discharge volume and the relevant initial application fee. For example, if a facility's effluent discharge volume falls between 10 and 100 cubic meters per day, that facility is categorized as small and the initial application fee is $15,000. One may look at this table and be inclined to say, well, I will pay the cheapest fee, which is $14,000. However, upon submission of your application with effluent data, the AMA reviews and verifies the effluent volume based on historical data for that facility. And if there are any discrepancies in the application fee, the EMA notifies that facility either to pay the difference or whether they are to be reimbursed. The formula for the discharge fee is the monitoring and inspection fee plus the net pollutant load, subtract the beneficial use. In this formula, we have discounted the beneficial use. So if a facility reuses their wastewater, for example, to wash their facility, that is a form of beneficial use of that wastewater, and it is discounted from your discharge fee. How we derive the discharge fee? We conducted jurisdictional review of 7 existing fee infrastructures. These 7 include Australia, 2 from the US being Louisiana and Wisconsin, Singapore, Malaysia, Jamaica, and Colombia. From that analysis, further assessment of the Wisconsin, Jamaican, and Malaysian models were recommended to determine which is the best fit for TNT. We sought guidance from the Economics Department of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, and the recommendation was for the adaptation of the discharge fee calculation from Jamaican Natural Resources Conservation Regulations of 2013. Since the implementation of the Water Pollution Rules 2019, the EMA has undertaken education and awareness drives through conducting presentations and development of website content. We have issued 48 notifications to apply for water pollution permits, and we have received 32 applications. 2 water pollution permits have been issued, one to an oil gathering facility and another to a food manufacturer. 4 facilities have been issued notices indicating that no permit is required, and the project is being developed for watershed improvement plans for the Arima and Corlan watersheds. A project is also being developed for drafting wastewater reuse standards. Additionally, all certificates and permits issued under the Water Pollution Rules 2001 are no longer valid. The EMA will advise facilities on the way forward. The EMA will also inform each facility when to submit an application. Subsequent to the issuance of a permit, the EMA will advise of the calculated annual discharge fee. This brings me to the end of our presentation, and this slide presents some of the social media handles through which you can contact the EMA for further information. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Lorraine and Vivian, for giving us a very detailed presentation into the revised water pollution rules. We would like to remind our participants that in the event that we are unable to respond to the questions in the level of detail that is required, or perhaps we may run out of time during the Q&A, we encourage you to submit the questions via our email at emawebinars@ema.co.tt. So just to get the discussion going, Vivian or Lorraine, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about any challenges that you have experienced thus far with the implementation of the revised rules.
Hi, thank you, Nadia, for the question. Yeah, well, the revision of the rules has been challenging. Well, as everyone knows, earlier this year, we went into lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has hampered our ability to conduct site visits. It's also affected some facilities because they had to restrict the numbers of persons coming into the facilities. So, you know, some of their service providers and so on. So that has actually had an impact. There's also, well, some of the challenges would be getting them to understand the mechanisms of this new process, and well, basically getting stakeholder buy-in is always a challenge. But we have attempted to let people know in advance, you know, even before the rules were passed or revised, that, you know, that this was coming, and to try to get them to understand what is required. So I think those were the two major challenges. I don't know if Vivian has anything to add.
Okay, so if Vivian has nothing to add.
Yes, Nadia, I just want to add.
Go right ahead.
Yes, in addition to what Lorraine indicated, some facilities have been hard hit by COVID-19, and they are unable to submit the application in time, so they actually have been requesting extensions over extensions, and that would account for for not having received all the applications in keeping with the number of notification letters we would have sent out.
Okay, and while we are on this topic, perhaps we can touch a little bit in terms of persons not being able to supply or to provide their application. Would you say that funding has been highlighted as one of those issues?
Yes, Nadia, I would definitely say so. A number of facilities have actually indicated that funding is a major challenge for them in this situation. And that resulted in them requesting extensions to submit applications, extensions to submit further information. So they have indicated the economic challenges with this current climate that we are in.
Okay, so I'm assuming that the EMA is trying their best to work with the stakeholders to ensure that they're able to achieve the requirements of the water pollution permit. So we'll go to another question. I have a CEC. Do I still have to submit a water pollution permit application? I have a CEC. Do I still have to submit a water pollution permit application?
Hi, Nadia. Yes, thank you for the question. Right, so most new facilities that were established after 2001 would have been required to apply for and obtain a Certificate of Environmental Clearance, or CEC. if your facility discharges wastewater into the environment, then most likely your CEC would specify that that wastewater discharge should immediately meet the permissible limit established in Schedule 2 for whichever receiving environment that you're discharging into. So the short answer is no, you will not be required to apply for a water pollution permit. I should mention that a water pollution permit really permits aim to capture those facilities that were in existence before 2001 and therefore don't have a CEC governing their wastewater discharges, right? And the idea with a water pollution permit is to give the facilities time in which to come into compliance with the permissible limit. So as indicated, if you already have a CEC specifying that your wastewater should meet the permissible limits of the second schedule, then you will not be asked to apply for a water pollution permit.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine, for providing clarity with respect to the CEC process as well. Our next question is actually approximately 2 questions, so I will read it twice so that you can follow. Does the EMA test on a regular basis our coastal waters in Trinidad and Tobago? Tourism requires that major beaches have their waters tested. Does the EMA do this regularly, or does this require a request? So the first question, does the EMA test on a regular basis our coastal waters? And is this done regularly, or does it require a request?
Sorry, Nadia, the audio broke up a little bit when you were asking the second part of the question, but with respect to the first part, no, the EMA does not test regularly. Sometimes we have specific projects which would specify, water quality testing, but these are ad hoc. As I said, it's for a specific purpose. So in the past, we have done coastal water quality testing to look at levels of particular bacteria. We've also done testing in specific watersheds to look at baseline water quality. But if we were to test water quality for any particular reason, we would need to source a lab and receive funding for that purpose. To my knowledge, the Institute of Marine Affairs does water quality testing more regularly than we do. Yeah. Could you repeat the second part of your question, please?
Sure, Lorraine, and thank you for answering the first part. So the second part had to do with does the EMA do this regularly, or does this require a request?
Right. So as I said, usually we would test if it's for a specific purpose, like a specific project. Sometimes if there is an environmental incident, then we would have to hire a lab to come in and do the water quality testing for us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. So the next question is also related to the CEC application process. How will the permitting process work alongside the CEC application process for modifications or upgrades to your facility or effluent outfalls? I'll repeat the question. How will the permitting process work alongside the CEC application process for modifications or upgrades to your facility or effluent outfalls?
Hi, Nadia. Thank you for the question. Once a CEC is issued, or if there's a modification to your facility, a CEC will be required. And as was mentioned before by my colleague, Ms. Lorraine Maharaj, once a CEC is issued, it would usually govern the effluent discharges from the facility because the CEC is a multimedia permit. So if you have a water pollution permit and you're doing a modification to your facility or have done a modification, you would have had to go through the CEC process, and then that permit now governs the effluent discharges from your facility. And the CEC condition would definitely require that you achieve compliance to second schedule, to schedule 2, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. So the next question is actually at least 2 parts to it. So can you tell us how many polluters are registered to date? And I know this was covered in the slides before, but you can remind our viewers how many polluters are registered to date and whether there have been any breaches.
Hi, Nadia. Thanks again for that question. So far, we issued 48 notification letters. We received 32 applications. We have issued 2 water pollution permits, and 4 facilities have been issued notices indicating that no permit is required. With respect to breaches to the permits, we have not had any thus far.
Okay, thanks, Vivian. And along the lines of those same questions, how can the public, seeing a possible breach in the water pollution rules, make complaints, especially in cases where it may be a risk to human life and property? So how can the public, seeing a possible breach in the water pollution rules, make complaints, especially in cases where it may be a risk to human life and property?
Thank you, Nadia, for the question. So the EMA has a hotline that you can call at any time to report any sort of environmental incident. Yeah. So, and yes, if you see a breach or some sort of environmental incident with risk to human health or safety, then yes, we encourage you to contact us, and our investigations unit will investigate the matter.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. We'll move along to the next question. It's a bit lengthy, so I'll read it twice. So this organization or company has a municipal drain running through their facility. We are currently conducting works to eliminate the wastewater from entering that drain. Would we still be liable for the pollutants in the wastewater running through our facility in that drain, or would it still be considered a sample point? So I will repeat. This organization has a municipal drain running through their facility. We are currently conducting works to eliminate the wastewater from entering that drain. Would we still be liable for the pollutants in the wastewater running through our facility in that drain, or would it still be considered a sample point?
Yes, thank you for the question. In a situation like that, what we would encourage is if the applicant can actually test the quality of the influent water to quantify the level of pollutants entering into the premises, right? So that we can then do a comparison and determine liability. But yes, if they can somehow reconfigure to ensure that their wastewater does not enter those drains, then we would encourage them to do so.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. So we have a few other questions from this forum. Can you share how would the ambient standards be done? Can you share how would the ambient standards?
Hi Nadia, I didn't quite hear the end of it, but I'm assuming the question is how were the ambient standards established? Am I correct?
Yes, Lorraine, you're correct. How would the ambient standards develop?
Okay, all right. So as far back as 2014, the EMA hired a consultant to review all of the publications, all of the CECs, all of the source registration and water pollution permit applications and technical papers, etc., to get an idea of the range of ambient water quality out there for or as many different water bodies as possible. The consultant was, as I said, um, asked to identify the range of ambient water quality present and to identify the uses of the different water bodies, water within the different water bodies. And also they were asked to compare the ranges that we found existing naturally with standards already developed for other regions. So for example, there were the um, Caribbean recreational water standards, CARICOM regional recreational water standards. We had some ambient water quality standards from Jamaica. They also looked at standards from Florida and New Zealand and Australia. So arising from that consultancy, they proposed draft ambient standards for Trinidad and Tobago and the designated water uses that we now have incorporated into the water pollution rules of 2019. Following that consultancy, the EMA undertook a study in the Arima and Colin watersheds to do what is referred to as to determine whether or not the proposed standards could be met for the designated water uses. We also convened a stakeholder committee comprising of a number of different groups. You had non-governmental organizations, you had representatives from UWI as well as UTT, you had people from different ministries, from the Division of Environment Tobago, as well as representatives from the Water Resources Agency, WASA, and the Institute of Marine Affairs. So this committee reviewed the proposed standards and also attempted to source any additional data that they might have had in-house and use that data to see whether or not the standards would be met. The committee finalized the proposed rules and the designated uses, and those were incorporated into the ambient water quality standards in the revised water pollution rules of 2019.
Thank you, Lorraine, for that very comprehensive response with respect to the ambient standards. So the next question, we'll move along quickly. I want to thank our viewers for your level of engagement and for all the comments and the questions that we are receiving. I understand that the permit is valid for 5 years. However, if I modify my plans or processes, does the permit remain valid during the period of 5 years, or do I reapply? I understand that the permit is valid for 5 years. However, if I modify my plans or processes, does the permit remain valid during the period of 5 years, or do I reapply?
Hi, Nadia. Thanks for that question. As mentioned before, if you are modifying your facility or your process, you will have to go through the CEC process, and the CEC then takes precedence over the water pollution permit. So once the CEC, your process or the modification includes your effluent discharge, then the CEC would be the relevant permit that takes precedence.
Okay, so while we are on this topic, I just want to remind our viewers that you can please contact EMA's Emergency Response Hotline at 680-9588 in the event of an environmental incident. And for complaints, you can email us at complaints@ema.co.uk or visit our website at ema.co.uk. Okay. So while we're on the topic of the CEC, there's another question. If a CEC is specific to a drilling activity or was granted to govern a project and not for the establishment of a facility, will a water pollution permit be required? I will repeat the question. If a CEC is specific to a drilling activity or was granted to govern a project and not the establishment of a facility, will a water pollution permit be required?
Thanks again, Nadia, for that question. And similarly, if there's a CEC for drilling activity and there's an effluent discharge, then the CEC would govern that effluent discharge and a water pollution permit may not be required.
Okay, thank you, Vivian, for that response. So we move along to another. Effluent data is required to make the application. If same is not being recorded, how should the entity proceed? Also, is there a specific period over which data must be released? So effluent data is required to make the application. If same is not being recorded, how should the entity proceed? Also, is there a specific period over which the data must be released?
Thanks again for that question, Nadia. With respect to the effluent data from the facility, we have taken the approach, as I mentioned before, to issue notification letters to facilities that were already in the permitting regime under the previous legislation. That means that we have historical data for those facilities. And we have allowed those facilities to use data as far back as 2 years to submit their application. However, if there is no valid effluent data, the facility will have to conduct a fresh set of sampling and submit that data to us. Usually we allow 30 working days from the receipt of the notification letter for the applicant to complete and submit the application with the effluent data. However, if they cannot submit within that time frame, they are always invited to request an extension to submit the requested further information.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. I just want to let you know that at this point, we will be launching the poll that I had mentioned earlier, and it's just a very short questionnaire on effectiveness of decision. It will be up for about 2 minutes, so we encourage everyone to provide their feedback. While that is being done, we'll move along to the next question. Will the applicant be responsible for developing the watershed improvement plan? Or will this be done alongside the EMA or with the EMA's guidance? Will the applicant be responsible for developing the watershed plan, or will this be done alongside the EMA?
Hi, Nadia. Yes, thank you for the question. The short answer is no. The EMA will be developing the watershed improvement plan, or I should say, the EMA, the intention is to hire or engage consultants to develop the watershed pollution plans. An applicant may be asked to participate in the plan. However, guidance will be provided down the line. I should point out, while we're on the topic, that the watershed improvement plans, last year we had a training workshop facilitated by the US EPA. And so we went through the process of developing standards as well as developing watershed improvement plans. And so we have a working framework which we will use to develop watershed improvement plans for the different watersheds of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, the intention is to identify and quantify all sources of or all inputs of water pollutants into each watershed and come up with mechanisms to mitigate or to prevent the entry of those pollutants into the environment.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lorraine. So we move to the next question. Can you tell me what is the policy for potable drinking water? What is the policy responsible for potable drinking water?
Okay, thank you for the question. So the Water and Sewerage Authority is actually responsible for the provision of potable drinking water. So they will abstract water from different abstraction points, and then they would treat water to within acceptable drinking water quality standards. Um, with respect to the ambient water quality standards, our standards aim to protect the raw water supply, right? As you are probably aware, every year the Water and Sewerage Authority spends a considerable amount of money to treat water to ensure that it's safe for drinking. What the ambient water quality standards would like to do is ensure the protection is there with the raw water supply to reduce the amount of treatment that WASA would then have to undertake to bring the water into acceptable drinking water quality standards.
Thank you, Nadia, for that question. We have historically had a number of quarries within our permitting system, and they are required, just as any permittee, to submit monitoring data. So yes, there is monitoring data for effluent discharges from quarries to our receiving environments, so our rivers.
Okay, Nadia, sorry. I'm afraid I didn't hear most of that question. I know it has something to do with the watershed improvement plans, and I heard part of the question asking who would be responsible for funding it. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, right. So the EMA would be responsible for developing these plans. As I said, we have guidance from the US EPA. We will be engaging a consultant to develop the plans. When it comes to implementation, then that would be like a more multi-stakeholder approach. So most likely we will be formulating committees, um, a committee, sorry, to guide the implementation of the plan within different watersheds. As you can imagine, different ministries would be involved, different community groups, and so on. Um, and also, the plans would include a monitoring component to ensure that the objectives are being met. And so, yes, uh, the funding for this development of these plans and for the monitoring will be through public sector investment program funding or from, I should say, from revised fees. Hi, Nadia. Thank you for the question. The frequency is determined based on a number of factors. One would be the how dangerous the pollutant is, and also the volume of discharge, and also best professional judgment.